The base was a scar, a deep, festering wound on the landscape, a reminder of a time when it was alive with activity, purpose, and human presence. Now, it stood as a testament to the passage of time and the inevitable decay that follows, a gash of concrete and steel against the bruised landscape. The structures, once proud and formidable, now lay in ruins, their surfaces marred by the relentless assault of the elements. Rusted steel beams jutted out like broken bones, a stark contrast against the overcast sky. It sprawled outwards, an immense, lifeless thing. The vast expanse of the base seemed to stretch on forever, a desolate wasteland of empty buildings and forgotten memories. Each structure told a story of its own, a silent witness to the passage of time and the erosion of purpose, an echo of purpose long forgotten. The remnants of military equipment, now rusted and overgrown with vegetation, stood as ghostly reminders of a bygone era. The once bustling hub of activity was now a silent, eerie monument to the past. The air hung heavy, thick with the stench of decay and something else, something unsettling, alien. The fog that enveloped the base added to the sense of foreboding, shrouding the decaying buildings in an almost supernatural gloom. It was as if the very air was alive with the memories of the past, whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. This was not a place for the living. The desolation was palpable, a stark reminder that life had long since abandoned this place. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of rusted metal or the distant call of a bird. The wind howled through the skeletal structures, a mournful, lonely sound. It was as if the very wind was mourning the loss of what once was, carrying with it the echoes of a time when the base was alive with the sounds of human activity. It carried whispers of madness, fragments of screams that tore at the edges of sanity. The shadows that danced along the walls seemed to take on a life of their own, moving and shifting in ways that defied explanation. It was as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges, threatening to unravel completely. The base was a graveyard of sanity, a place where time and reality twisted, buckled, and finally snapped. The overgrown paths and twisted, broken structures were a testament to the relentless march of time and the inevitable decay that follows. It was a place where the boundaries between the past and the present, the real and the unreal, seemed to blur and fade away. It was a black hole, swallowing everything that dared to venture within its grasp. The dark entrance to the dilapidated bunker seemed to beckon, a gaping maw that promised only darkness and despair. The shadowy ruins of the old military base stood as a stark reminder of the impermanence of human endeavors, a haunting echo of a time long past. Corporal Kane stumbled through the oppressive gloom. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. He clutched his rifle, a lifeline in a sea of madness. But even the familiar weight of the weapon couldn't ground him. Not anymore. The base was a labyrinth, twisting him, turning him, stealing his sense of direction. He had been here, he thought, seen this corridor, this rusted door. But the thoughts slipped away like sand through his fingers. His mind was a battlefield, memories flickering in and out of focus like faulty projections. He was losing himself, drowning in the static.
I'm losing myself, drowning in the static.
The screen flickered. Static danced across the monitor, obscuring the image. Lena's eyes were glued to the screen, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What was happening? Why now? The room was dark, the only light coming from the erratic glow of the television. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unseen tension. Lena held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. Each beat echoed in her ears, a relentless reminder of her growing anxiety. She could feel the cold sweat forming on her forehead, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the couch. The silence of the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of the static. Then for a fleeting moment the interference cleared. She saw him, Kane. Her heart skipped a beat, a mix of relief and dread washing over her. She leaned in closer, her eyes widening as she tried to make sense of the image before her. It was him, but something was terribly wrong. His face, gaunt and pale, filled the screen. The man she once knew, full of life and energy, was now a mere shadow of his former self. His skin was almost translucent, his cheekbones jutting out sharply. It was as if he had been drained of all vitality, leaving behind a hollow shell. His eyes, usually so full of life, were vacant, haunted. They stared back at her, empty and devoid of the spark that once defined him. It was a look that sent chills down her spine, a look that spoke of unspeakable horrors. She could barely recognize him, and yet she knew it was Kane. A shiver ran down Lena's spine. This wasn't her Kane. This was a twisted version of the man she loved, a version that had been touched by something dark and malevolent. She could feel the fear creeping up on her, wrapping around her like a cold, suffocating blanket. This was something else, something broken, The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Whatever had happened to Kane, it had changed him in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. She felt a pang of helplessness, a deep, gnawing despair that threatened to consume her.
Kane. Her voice was barely a whisper, a desperate plea that hung in the air. She hoped, prayed, that he could hear her, that somehow her words could reach through the static and the darkness that surrounded him.
She whispered, her voice trembling. The words felt foreign on her lips, as if she was speaking to a stranger. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But her voice was lost, swallowed by the static that rose once more, consuming his image, leaving her staring into the abyss of the dead screen. The connection was severed, and with it, her last glimmer of hope. The room seemed to grow colder, the darkness more oppressive. She was left alone, staring at the blank screen, her mind racing with questions and fears. What had happened to Kane? Where was he now? And most importantly, how could she save him? The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that raged within her. A single tear rolled down her cheek. He was alive, but lost to something she couldn't comprehend. The weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. She felt a deep, aching sorrow, a sense of loss that cut through her like a knife. Lost to something she couldn't comprehend. The world around her seemed to blur, her thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, confusion, and determination. She knew she couldn't give up, not now. She had to find a way to bring him back, to save him from whatever darkness had claimed him. But how? The question lingered, unanswered, as she sat there, lost in her own horror. Time was fluid here, unreliable. It stretched and compressed, moments bleeding into each other until Kane couldn't tell what was real and what was a phantom of his unraveling mind. He was adrift in a sea of madness, the familiar landmarks of his reality swallowed by the fog. He thought he saw his reflection in a shattered window, but the face staring back was wrong, older, haunted. He blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the encroaching darkness and a sense of dread that clung to him like a shroud.
What is happening to me?
The silence was shattered. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the desolate corridors. Kane spun, his rifle coming up instinctively. Adrenaline surged through him, momentarily clearing the fog of confusion.
I wasn't alone, but who was firing and at whom?
He saw them then, shadowy figures moving through the gloom. They were his squad, he realized. Or were they?
Their faces, they were obscured by the shadows, their movements jerky and unnatural.
They fought with a desperate frenzy, but their enemy remained unseen. Section 6. The figure humanity distorted. The footage froze. On the screen, a figure stood bathed in the flickering light of a burning barrel. It was vaguely humanoid, but twisted, deformed. Its limbs were elongated, contorted at unnatural angles. Its skin was stretched taut across its bones, revealing a grotesque parody of a human skeleton.
But it was the eyes that held Lena's gaze. Large, black, and filled with an intelligence that was both alien and deeply unsettling. They seemed to bore into her, seeing her, judging her.
The figure stood motionless, caught between a step and a scream, forever frozen in the digital amber of the recovered footage. Section 7. Witness to madness, whispers of fear. A cold dread settled over the room as the women watched the footage. Whispers snaked around the table, hushed voices tinged with terror. The image on the screen, a grotesque mockery of life, became a tangible thing, a specter that haunted the room.
What is that?
Someone breathed, their voice barely a whisper. No one answered. They all knew with a chilling certainty that whatever stalked the corridors of the abandoned base was beyond human comprehension. It was a creature born of nightmares, a thing that defied classification. Section 8. Mayor's End. A necessary evil? Kane backed away, his eyes wide with horror. The dim light of the corridor cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the scene even more surreal. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the dread that filled his mind. He had never imagined it would come to this, facing his friend in such a dire situation.
Mayor, stop! Kane's voice cracked with desperation. He could see the madness in Mayor's eyes, a wild, uncontrollable fury that seemed to have consumed him entirely. The man he once knew was buried deep beneath his terrifying exterior.
He screamed, his voice hoarse, but Mayor just kept coming, his face contorted in a rictus of rage, a rusty pipe clutched in his hand. The air was thick with tension, every step Mayor took echoing ominously in the narrow corridor. Kane's mind raced, searching for a way to reach his friend, to pull him back from the brink of insanity. The man he had known, his friend, was gone, consumed by whatever darkness had taken root in this cursed place. Memories of their shared past flashed before Kane's eyes. The laughter, the camaraderie, the trust. It all seemed so distant now, overshadowed by the present horror. He had no choice. He fired. The shot echoed through the desolate corridor, a final punctuation mark in the symphony of madness. The sound was deafening, a stark contrast to the silence that followed. Kane's hand trembled as he lowered the gun, the weight of his action settling heavily on his shoulders. Mayer crumpled to the ground, the light fading from his eyes. Kane stared down at his friend's body, his stomach churning. The reality of what he had done hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming and relentless. He had taken a life that once meant so much to him. He had taken a life, but had he saved a soul? The question gnawed at him, a relentless whisper in the back of his mind. He wondered if there had been another way, a path that didn't lead to this tragic end. The corridor seemed to close in around him, the walls bearing silent witness to his torment. Kane knew that this moment would haunt him forever, a dark shadow in his memories. The line between right and wrong had blurred, leaving him in a moral quagmire. He had acted out of necessity, but the cost was a piece of his own soul. As he stood there lost in thought, he realized that some evils are indeed necessary, but they come with a heavy price. Section 9. No escape. The nightmare unfolds. The static on the screen intensified, the image dissolving into a chaotic dance of light and shadow. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The screen went dark. Dead.
But in the silence that followed, Lena could have sworn she heard it. A low, guttural growl. Coming not from the speakers, but from somewhere else. Somewhere close.
The base was not finished. It was a living thing, hungry and malevolent, and it wasn't done with them. Not yet.